We are at the Freiburg New Church Assembly. It is Thursday, August 10th, and my name is Reverend Susannah Currie, and my message this morning is how truth can set us free. I'd like to begin with reading John 8, verses 31 to 32. If you abide in my word, then you are truly my disciples, and ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. The truth will make you free. Now, when I was a kid, I thought that the religions of my friends were restrictive, that they insisted on conformity. They portrayed being religious as being the same as their neighbors. But how could there be any freedom in the Christian faith if we're told what to wear and not to dance or play cards on Sunday, both of which I enjoyed? What truth will set me free? After trying a few different churches, it was no religion, and then Eastern thought that I felt offered the truths that I could believe in, until Swedenborg came my way in 1988 when I was 33. At the Portland church, I began to feel a new truth and a way back to Christianity. And at the same time as I was getting involved in the church, I went to the Portland Library, and in the spirituality section, the compendium of Swedenborg's works dropped on the floor in front of me. It was a clear sign I was meant to read it. So I'm going to start with a quote from New Jerusalem and its Heavenly Doctrines, number 148. All freedom belongs to the love or affection. For what a person loves, they do freely. Since freedom belongs to the love, it is the life of everyone. There is heavenly freedom and there is infernal freedom. Heavenly freedom belongs to the love of good and truth. And since the love of good and truth is from the Lord, freedom itself consists in being led by the Lord. Through regeneration, a person is introduced by the Lord into heavenly freedom. A person ought to be in freedom in order that they may be regenerated. Otherwise, the love of good and truth cannot be implanted in a person and appropriated to them, so as to appear their own. Nothing is conjoined to a person which is done under compulsion. If a person could be reformed by compulsion, all would be saved. But compulsion is hurtful in reformation. That was a real truth I could relate to. That compulsion takes away our free will. Others are forcing something on us. And when it is not our free will to believe something or to act in a certain way, then we cannot be reformed by that because we're doing it under duress. What became clear is that we are the Lord's, but appear to be ourselves. Now, I've had a very blessed path in life. Love has led me to marriage, family, communities, and church. And many times I felt the guidance to find the good and true things in life. And I could feel it was always God in me. God guides us through our lives to come to new understandings of truth. And I'd like to give you two examples of that from my own children. My son Ben, when he was about 8, came to me and said, "Mom, I've decided to tell the truth." I'm like, "Good. How'd you come to that?" He says, "Well, it's too much trouble to lie. I have to remember what I said to people, and what I said to this person is not what I said to that person." Basically, he was too lazy to lie. So he felt the truth was the easier path, and certainly it is the good path. My daughter Grace, when she first had her son, she was remembering a time in her life when she was 6 or 7, when she was at school one day, and she told me this after she had her son. She never told me when she was little. She had looked around her classroom and saw all the kids, and her mind said, "I'm not any different from any of these other kids. Why does Mom love me so much?" Then she had her son. Then she understood the love of a parent for a child. And the truth of that came through experience. The same with Ben. These are lessons that came through experience. We have to test the truths in our lives to feel that they're really part of us. And Swedenborg says often that what we believe, what we feel, all well and good. Our intentions guide our thinking. We want to understand how to live the intentions. But if we never do them, as they say, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. We have to act on them to confirm them in ourselves so that they live with us eternally. From the Arcana, we hear, goods and truths are either of the Lord or not of the Lord. Those which are of the Lord are those which person does for the sake of their neighbor, for the sake of their country, for the sake of the church, and for the sake of the Lord's kingdom. Thus, for the sake of good and truth itself, and especially for the sake of the Lord. These goods and truths are those which are of the Lord, but the truths and goods which are not of the Lord are those which a person does for the sake of themselves as the end, and for the sake of the world as the end. These latter sometimes appear like the former in outward form, but in the inward form they are quite different. For these lead to self, but those away from self. Freedom from worship is worship, but not worship from compulsion. Repentance ought to be practiced in a free state. What is done in a state of coercion is of no avail. Now, it wasn't until I addressed a personal compulsion that I began to see that the freedom in faith is that we freely believe and are free to make mistakes and learn. And I will admit it. My name is Susannah Currie. I was a perfectionist. I always needed to be right. But I began to feel my growth as an increase in wisdom to do good had nothing to do with being right and nothing to do with being perfect. Leaning towards good and seeking ways to do it wisely is our daily walk. God knows us, supports us, encourages us, and provides for us. When we have a strong need to satisfy me, we are immersed in compulsions and addictions. And they have a strong hold over our freedom to choose, as these are evils that we think look like pleasures. They reel us slowly into their grip. Now, one of the things for me personally that's been very difficult in understanding that I was in the grip of a compulsion is because I've been very effective. And people would ask me to do more things. And then they would ask me to do more things when I finished the first thing. And because I could be effective, nobody noticed that inside me was a compulsion to be right and to always say yes. And it is not healthy. As my son Ben once told me, Mom, leave some problems for someone else to solve. It's an important thing that we realize we are equally in this world on our regeneration path. And I loved a phrase that Kent shared with us last week. He said, we are called to imperfectly love imperfection, because that's who we are. We hear from the heavenly doctrines, doing evil from freedom appears like freedom, when yet it is bondage, because it is the freedom which arises from the love of self and the love of the world. And these loves are from hell. After death, such freedom also is actually turned into bondage, for then the person who has been in such freedom becomes in hell a base slave. Therefore, the Son shall make you free. Ye shall be free indeed. Now, because all good is from the Lord and all evil from hell, it follows that freedom consists in being led by the Lord and bondage in being led by hell. Yet in the world around us, we need to recognize that so many people are being led by hell. Yet they feel free to do so, which they are. But that freedom to do it then becomes bondage to what they cannot escape. I could not escape for a long time the feeling that I had to keep being the best I could and always say yes and do everything that everybody asked me to do. Not necessarily healthy. When you're in a group, you need to share responsibilities, as we do here. We need to share our thoughts and feelings with each other and increase our wisdom by our communal feelings and our communal reliance on one another. So what addictions have had a hold on you? Could be something like perfectionism, self-righteousness, negativity, always doing good and not letting others? Think for a moment about what, you might not think of them as addictions, he also uses the word compulsions, but that have a hold on you so that you are not in freedom. If you feel you must do something or somehow God will not love you, that is a compulsion. Continuing from the Arcana passage earlier, Swedenborg writes, a person is permitted to act from freedom of reason that good may be provided for them. And on that account, they are in the freedom of thinking and willing, and even of doing evil, so far as the laws do not forbid it. A person is kept by the Lord between heaven and hell, and thus in a state of equilibrium, that they may be in freedom for the sake of their reformation. What is inseminated in freedom remains, but not what is inseminated under compulsion. Wherefore freedom is never taken away from anyone. No one is compelled by the Lord. How the Lord through freedom leads a person into good, namely through freedom, they turn the person away from evil and incline them to good, so gently and quietly that they do not know otherwise than that all proceeds from themselves. Continuing, compelling oneself from freedom, but not being compelled, a person ought to compel themselves to resist evil, that they ought also to compel themselves to do good as if of themselves, but still acknowledge that it is from the Lord. That is the biggest truth that we can hold, is that to do good as of ourselves, but still to acknowledge that it is from the Lord. And to do that, to do good from ourselves, sometimes we have to compel ourselves, which is different than being compelled by others. Compelling ourselves to accept the truths of faith, that the Lord is one, and that we are the Lord's hands and hearts to bring heaven to earth, and that each loving, wise act counts. We are forgiven our mistakes, and we try to learn from them. Now, earlier in this week, there was a distinction made between the spiritual and celestial levels of love. And I was really struck by that, and I want to raise it up again, that on the natural level, we love others. On the spiritual level, we love others as ourselves. And on the celestial level, we love others as the Lord loves us. So we can see the deepening of that love as we move from the natural to the celestial level. And I had an experience of this that really helped bring it home to me. I was at my camp in Denmark, and many of you know Ken Turley, he was visiting, and I had a little hatchet that I was using to break up kindling. And he says, oh yeah, I got to get me a hatchet. You know, he was heating with wood. He needed a hatchet. Now I had just gotten this hatchet, and I was kind of attached to it. But I gave it to him. And part of me said, oh yeah, you can just go buy another one. But I thought to myself, no, this feels like a significant, I am loving him more than me because I'm giving him the hatchet that I love, that I wanted to keep, and I want to always remember this. So I didn't buy another hatchet. I still use the axe to chop up the kindling. But the feeling of giving someone something that you want to keep, that's the spiritual level, loving others as the self. The same love I had for it, I wanted to give. And this is, I mean, I can't say for sure that we don't experience the celestial sometimes in our lives where we love others as the Lord loves us. It seems like a very high calling to be able to love that deeply and widely. But the move from the just loving others when it's not an inconvenience to loving others and letting it be an inconvenience. Let the love others as you love yourself. It's the higher level. It's bringing it to our awareness that we are sacrificing something for another person. And Jesus and his sacrifice of dying on the cross, I mean, I don't aspire or ascribe to the notion that that means we are all saved forever by that sacrifice, but it's modeling the sacrifice of giving yourself up for others. Think about if you might have done that in your life, that you might have not just loved others, worked out well, fits in your schedule, no problem, to the loving others as the self. I know many people who work in the human services professions understand that love. They go to work when they're tired. They take care of people when they can't even think straight anymore. The nurses, especially the medical people throughout the coronavirus, they were loving others as themselves. And I'm sure in some cases, loving as the Lord loves us. From TCR, we read, "A person prepares themselves naturally to receive the Lord, so the Lord enters and makes all that is within the person inwardly spiritual and thus alive. But on the other hand, so far as a person does not prepare themselves, he removes the Lord from them, and they do everything from themselves. And what a person does from themselves has no real life in it." Let's sit with that one a minute. When you do everything from yourself and for yourself, what you do has no life in it. And I think I used this example a number of times in preaching in Bridgewater, and I'm sure Marilee will remember that I could make the best pasta dinner ever and bring it to Marilee. What a gift! But she can't eat it. That's not a gift. That's not a gift when it's just, I did it because it was convenient for me, but it's not thinking of the other person and their needs. And on the other hand, I could make the best gluten-free dinner ever because I want Marilee to think highly of me. Also not the best intention. You might have a wise form, but it might not be the right intention. So we need to continually look at where we're coming from. The truth is that God is love, and we are love in God's image. From the Arcana we read, "Moreover, everyone ought to do what is good and true as of themselves, yet believing that it is from the Lord. And when they do so, then as they grow up and increase in intelligence and faith, they put off that fallacy and at last acknowledge at heart that their every effort of doing good and thinking truth was and is from the Lord." Now, I want to talk a bit about these infernal and heavenly freedoms because it seems like when what you want is infernal freedom, freedom to follow the hells, it feels like this teachings about good and truth are so restrictive. What? I have to behave myself? I have to speak nicely to people? I want to be free to spout off any opinion I have whenever I feel like it. That can become so addictive. I mean, you probably know people who love to swear. I mean, swearing is like every second word out of their mouth. Are they free if they can't find another word to use? Are we free when we are under that sort of that umbrella of my only value is if I do this, if I consistently behave myself in public, look upright, and if my internals are, I'm doing this because I want to look like a good person, that's not freedom. And yet, it took me a while to realize that the freedom from the Lord, the freedom to choose good and truth, is so restful. It's really hard to live under a life of compulsion, and anyone who's had an addiction knows that. They might try over and over again. I think my husband tried to quit smoking maybe 50 times before he finally did. The compulsion was so strong. But to let go of it, there's a freedom there that we don't experience when we are under compulsion, when we are in an addiction of any kind. And I'd like to really ask you to think about the psychological addictions. To be the most well-read person, to be the one who runs the fastest and can't let anyone else win. The truth, again, is that God is love, and we are love in God's image. So when we are following the Lord's guidance, we are in the freedom to be whatever kind of love we want to be. The freedom to be uniquely ourselves. The freedom to love others as ourselves. But don't forget the natural has an important role. That's the loving others, acting as if it is from the Lord. And the more we act as if, the more we get the experience of it, and it becomes real to us. Letting the Lord lead and guide you to the truth of the divine life in you is freedom. It is restful. It is peaceful. You don't have to figure out everything you need to do. You can wait until the Lord inspires you. One of the things that I felt during my work life as a compulsion was I had to write down everything I had to do on a list. Single space, 8.5 by 11, 2 pages. You know how much of a burden that is? The burden of thinking, I've got to do all these things. But at one point I said, but I'm not going to figure out what to do next. I would just, in the morning, I would sit with my list, and I'd say, okay, Lord, what are we doing today? And wait for the guidance that said what was most important. You can trust the Lord to do that. You can trust the Lord to help you not forget the important things, because the Lord is guiding you to the good and the truth of your own life, the things that you can find and act on and do. As he said in John 8, if you abide in my word, then you are truly my disciples, and ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. And the truth is not just about the Lord. The truth is about you. What are your roadblocks to feeling the Lord guide your every decision, your every action? So let's talk about roadblocks for a minute. Anybody got any? No? We're all smooth on the road to the Lord? Because I think that that's the key to our spiritual growth. And the Lord is right there, always ready to guide us. But we say, oh, no, I got this. I was in a clergy support group when I was in Pennsylvania, and one of the fellows was very honest, and he said, you know, I am very faithful on Sundays. I pray before I preach. And then I go out the rest of the week, and I am an atheist. I don't listen to God. I do my own thing. And he recognized that he was not letting the Lord guide him. And that's kind of hubris, in a way, that, oh, I got it all figured out. Anybody ever thought that? Got it all figured out? I know what my day's going to be like? How often has your day been like what you thought? Because the Lord brings things into our lives because we need them for our growth, for our learning. I went to seminary in Newton. I used to take the bus down from Portland area to Boston once a week, and it was a big snowstorm one day, and I had to walk from the bus stop up to the school. It was up a big hill. And so I was walking up the hill, trudging in my big boots through the snow, and a woman was coming down the hill, and she swerved and landed in the snowbank. So I thought about it. I said, well, I'm going to be late, but she had a kid in the car, and I said, let me help you get out of the snowbank. So we shoveled out the snow as best we could, and I got her back on her way. And then I started back up the hill towards the seminary, and I had to laugh because the class I was going to was pastoral care. Now, how smart would it have been for me to leave that woman in the snowbank and go learn about pastoral care? I mean, I had an opportunity right in front of me to do it. That's what we get. We get opportunities all the time. Opportunities to do love, to either just loving or loving as ourselves or loving as the Lord loves. We get these opportunities, And when we engage in them, we feel the Lord's presence. Have you had that happen when you are doing a loving act and you really just feel the Lord's presence with you? I mean, we know the Lord is doing it, but what a gift to feel it in the moment. That's true freedom. Freedom to follow our natural inclination to good and truth. Freedom to be a good and true person in community. And the wonderful glimpses of the Lord in that. I mentioned people in helping professions, and I'm a board-certified chaplain, and it changed my life to be with people in their need. And so often, the Lord was not in the words so much as in the presence. Being present with someone who is dying, being present with their family, maybe saying a few words. I was always surprised how few words it took to support people in that. And the biggest support that chaplains and also volunteers, I would always make sure to tell the volunteers this, the gift is your presence because you show the family and the patient that you are not afraid to be there. You're not afraid to be on the front lines of life and death. And then they don't have to be afraid. They know someone will sit with them. Someone will be on that journey with them. And that is the presence of God. I've felt it many times, and I feel so humbled by it. And we have a chaplain support group for convention ministers, and it's one of the things we talk about a lot is what a privilege it is to do that work. Because we are being brought clearly and brightly into the Lord's presence because we're not afraid, and we're showing other people they don't have to be afraid. That is all I have to share with you this morning. I would welcome your comments, your experiences, anything you'd like to share. And Dave's got the microphone. Nancy?
Hi, this is Nancy Little. The Flames and I are exploring the topic of freedom this week. And one thing that kind of helps me when I think about freedom is to think about that it's something that I need to be really careful with how I use my freedom, because it can be used in negative ways and positive ways.
Can you give an example?
I think you gave some good examples earlier.
Okay.
But sure. So I can have the freedom to overeat, abuse my body, and just on the flip side of that, I can be careful about what I put in my mouth, and I can get daily exercise.
Yeah, exactly right. And you remind us that it's not in just the big decisions, it's in every little daily act, every little daily choice that we make. Yeah. Martha?
I liked what Grace said. I felt like I understood God's love more after I had children. I understood not only how much He really did love us, because I definitely couldn't love that much. Even though I did love my children, and I know, and then I understood how He could love everybody, but I also was in awe at how much more He loved us. And then I do have one little story. I think it was the second year I stayed here. I had bought this mug that I really liked because it had a wide, flat bottom. and then it came up, so it wouldn't tip over.
Mm-hmm.
I can't explain it. It was wide down here and narrow at the top. And I really liked it. I thought, this is for me because I can handle this.
Mm-hmm.
And then Gloria was here, and I thought she could really use this mug.
Mm-hmm.
And so when she left camp, I gave it to her. And I often wonder if she's used it, but I don't mind if she does not. It's just that I felt, she could really use it. And so I understand that. But I'm thinking sometimes when I used to do things, I know, so to get them done, and I wanted to do them, and I wanted to be the best, and and do all these things, and I could do it right, and someone else would do it wrong, and all this. But now I just see something that needs to be done, and I know the Lord's working through me, but I don't think about it. I just go do it because I love to do it, and I can do it. And then on the flip side, not the flip side that I see things now I can't do. I would love to help, like in the kitchen, or take things back and forth, but I'm too slow. I'd just be in the way. I can't maneuver my balance and do it. So I just step back and know that it's being done and not worry about it.
It's important to recognize the changes in our lives. I actually, Martha, you might like this book. I just started, it's Ram Dass. He says, I'm Still Here, and it's about aging. And the spiritual opportunities as we age, when we let go of doing the physical things and let others, as Colgate said, the baby boomers ought to sit down and be quiet. I can relate to that. The younger people have the energy, need the experience. And this is another thing that I received from chaplaincy, was working with a lot of older women in nursing homes, and they felt like they might just as well go. Why am I even here? I reminded them that throughout their lives, all that they gave them a great joy to give. Well, aren't you going to let the next generation feel that too? Aren't you going to let them feel the goodness of helping you? Because we can be a little selfish in thinking that we are the only ones who can do things. And that's another thing about the infernal freedoms. The love of self and the love of the world can also be being down on yourself and down on the world. Whether you are loving it or hating it, you're focusing on it. It doesn't matter what the feeling is if you're focused on yourself. It can be a good feeling or a bad feeling. But the Lord loves us, so when we let the Lord guide us, we can kind of flow down the river, like how fast they're flowing down the river now. I saw an inner tube go by record speed.
I'll say something, David Keating. I was going to say what you said about, I'm thinking of one person in particular, older, this was a while ago. She was very upset that she wasn't physically able to help people anymore. And I said, well, you've gotten so much joy out of helping people, now you can let other people get joy helping you.
That's right.
But another thing, if I do end up in a nursing home, I can be useful by being nice to the people that are waiting on me and not be angry. You can be angry that you can't do anything anymore and that you're stuck here. I can be useful by being a nice and a fun patient for them to work with.
Absolutely.
Which will be a challenge probably. But it will be a useful challenge to do that.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's a great reminder, David. It's not just how we feel about following the Lord. It's how we make others feel while we're following the Lord. And are we giving them some of the joy that we feel, and giving them our smiles and our thank yous and our appreciation? And goodness knows the workers in nursing homes need it.
Oh, just to add to that, I've read it in other spiritual teachers. They said, you don't try to convert people. You want people to see how joyful you are and how helpful and how much you're loving life. Say, and they'll want to get what you have.
That's right.
And then you can lead them to the Lord and say, well, if you try this, and you know it's always stuck with me. That's the way to draw people into the Lord, is to emanate it.
Absolutely. We are models in the world. We are lights in the world, every one of us.
Thank you, Susannah. So thinking of being right, that was a good part of it. So I'm realizing that there's implied something. That one is the humility to know that there is such a thing as objective truth or accuracy. So there are things that are right, there are true. And there could be an argument about that. So in that case, if one is actually an expert in the area and knows it's right and is talking to a person who is, and there are cases you could probably think of, I'm not going to try to think of an example, but they're just not right. They're wrong about a simple objective thing, like the whether or not there's a Saco River Commission, let's just say. There is one. If somebody says, no, there's not, that's impossible. Well, you really don't want to get into an argument about that, and you don't want to have to be right, even though you are. So in that case, what's implied in your talk, I think, is you need to be patient and wonder, well, I don't know why this person believes that, but I'm going to work with it and just not get into it right now and maybe try again later to help the person. So certainly there's an example of being right, but not having to be right to prove something. So we would want to know that. And the other point or the idea I'm laying out, of course, is that there is such a thing as objective truth with the physical world. Trees are made of cambium, and that's how they bring water up, this kind of thing. So that's simple, but there's an objectivity to it that's humbling, and I think it's part of what you're talking about. Now, if I may, I'd like to take this a little deeper idea about being right and ask myself, well, if I'm talking to a person who has to be right about something, what is it that they're having to be right about? And if I think about it, it will often be something extremely important to them. Let me think here. Well, let's just take an example. We use this from time to time, and I'm really not being judgmental when I say this, but there are people who would say that the Bible is literally true. That's an objective truth to them, and they are going to have to be right about that. So I'm not likely to get into a long conversation about that, but as an example, what's called for is obviously not trying to talk that person out of that, in my view, wrong belief. It's to try to understand why do they hold that belief. And what you'll find in a second and a half is that their life depends on it. You would not want to take that away from them. And so you never want to be right in that kind of situation because the stakes are too high for the person who has to be right. And so I wanted just to observe that.
And you're lifting up that's their experience, that you are leaving them in freedom to have. And when you said that, Gard, I've got the perfect example for that from the breakfast line. Because you remember the little eggs that kind of look round like that? And Zachary was sure it was a pancake. I said, no, Zachary, that's an egg. He says, no, it's a pancake. He went as far as putting syrup on it. And then when he tried it, he realized it was not a pancake. But he was so sure, and experience taught him. My telling him didn't sink in, but his experience taught him he was wrong. And when we can let people have their own experiences, we are leaving them in freedom to grow. And I think that your point that there's not a point in arguing with them, perhaps learning to understand them more, there's a point to that, because when we can truly see each other and understand each other, we certainly have a deeper connection. But there's some people you can't tell anything to, and Lee, as his teacher, will attest, you cannot tell Zachary anything he does not want to hear. Martha?
Made me think of when you're trying to teach a small child that the stove is hot and not to touch it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you know that at some point, no matter how many times you tell that child not to touch that, they're going to touch it. Yeah. And once they touch it, then they know it's hot.
Then they've learned. Yeah. Well, hearing no more questions from the group, we'll have a little longer break today. You are excused.